The EU decision to grant the UK a third and final extension to Brexit and the hardening of attitudes evident in the EU response has redefined political crisis. Sometimes it's less like a revolution, though you can never rule that out, more like a long drawn out stasis where a whole country dies of boredom and angst. The EU's response also demonstrates what Greek dramatists had in mind when they talked about hubris, that is, a fate brought about by the protagonist's own actions and weaknesses. And so the UK's decision to exit is no longer fully in the hands of the British government or voters. It rests with the very elite which the UK sought to break free from, to reclaim their sovereignty and the sovereign responsibilities of all countries to their people. How did this come about? Well, to begin with, Theresa May's withdrawal agreement was radioactive from the very moment that she signed up in it last November. And yet, it has continued to dominate the UK politics. Her mantra, it's my deal or no deal, demonstrates an insensitivity to any understanding on her part of having negotiated a monumentally awful deal. She now has until the end of October to get Parliament to endorse a withdrawal agreement which it has already emphatically and in record numbers rejected 3 times. And 3 times Mrs May has felt impelled to request a deferral of Brexit, originally scheduled for the 29th of March, a long time ago. There have been well over 30 resignations from her government, including ministers at the very heart of the Brexit process itself. There is simply no precedent for this. Having failed to convince her own party, and indeed her own government, which is now irretrievably split, Mrs May pivoted away from seeking the support of MPs to engaging with the opposition Labour Party in an attempt to do a deal, any kind of deal, that would squeeze through Parliament. Customs union, internal market, second referendum, long delay, short delay, anything, so long as it can be portrayed and sold as Brexiting. In other circumstances, this might seem or be spun as a broad-minded and principled effort to reach out to different perspectives and politics in order to deliver Brexit. It's nothing of the sort. It's an increasingly frenetic doubling down on a flawed deal. It resonates with her own switch from Remain to Leave, thereby securing for her the leadership of the Conservative Party and the keys to number 10. And power, and so hubris has kicked in. The fact is, Mrs May should not be in number 10 at all. Her party are as helpless in exiting from her reign as they are in exiting from the EU. It's been a torrid political journey for the UK, from her decision, having secured power, to hold an unnecessary and ruinous general election in 2017, and to being well and truly played off the field by the EU, and saddled with a deal that has fractured the constitutional and political landscape of the UK. There's something surreal about the last 4 months. Seeing the Prime Minister at the dispatch box Parliament, even as power and authority leached away from her, first to the House of Commons itself, and then to the Labour Party. In office, but not in power. Ambition and dependence are not good travelling companions. Watching Mrs. May travelling to seemingly interminable EU meetings and summits, waiting in corridors for answers to pleas, having to sue for support from the German Chancellor and the French President, the latter seeing her off from the Elysee Palace, evoking memories of Mrs. Thatcher, who at least won, remember, 3 general elections, driving away one last time from Downing Street. It's beyond embarrassing. It's sad. Mrs. May's request for a 3rd extension to June was transmuted into a longer one to October, with a midterm report in June. Unless the UK exit before May, which he's still trying to do by pushing the failed bill through Parliament, the UK will have to partake in the European elections, which Mrs. May had set her face against, and with good reason. Yet another red line come to naught, and the prospect of devastating electoral losses. The transition from her signature insistence that Brexit means Brexit to a looming arrangement with the Labour Party for a customs union in all but name has been an exercise in confounding the outcome of the 2016 referendum, to which she committed her premiership. Where does all this leave the UK now? A former governor of the Bank of England, a very distinguished international economist as well, Professor Mervyn King, put it best, I think. He said, "There's been no coherent plan for exiting ever published. There are arguments for remaining in the EU and arguments for leaving the EU, but there is no case forever for giving up the benefits of remaining without obtaining the benefits of leaving." And yet that, as he points out, is exactly what the government is now proposing. It simply beggars belief, he says, that a government could be hell-bent on a deal that hands over 39 billion while giving the EU both the right to impose laws on the UK indefinitely and a veto on ending this state of fiefdom. That's what Professor King has said, and he is, of course, entirely right. Ireland has made a contribution to the confounding of Brexit, and I think this must be acknowledged. Under Strand 3 of the Good Friday Agreement, we could legitimately have intermediated between the EU and the UK and mitigated the impact of the deal breaker, the backstop. We didn't. We insisted that there were no plans to impose a hard border in the event of a no deal. There are, of course, there have to be. And that led to Mrs. Merkel's fact-finding mission to Dublin. Even with the multiple failures in the management of Brexit by Mrs. May's government, Ireland's nearest neighbour, our closest trading partner with huge historical links, still deserve better than last-minute photo opportunities to advocate for an extension. There is no sight to the end of the Brexit process that could and should have been completed under the calm and measured terms of Article 50, because that's what it's about. Whatever happens now, the dissension between leave and remain will endure for generations. It's redefined crisis and politics. Political scientists may argue that the decision by David Cameron to hold a referendum on Brexit in 2013 was where it all went wrong. But that argument doesn't stand up. It was, after all, through a referendum that the UK, along with Ireland, acceded to then what was called the European Economic Community. In any event, Brussels, along with the Labour Party, has long been pushing for a second referendum. It was a failure of leadership, of strategy, and of contingency planning. It would be far more realistic to say that, as Irish voters discovered in the Lisbon Treaty debacle a decade ago, a decade ago, that the EU does not do direct democracy. Voters might make the wrong decision, and then where would you be? In any event, the UK was always going to balk at closer political and budgetary integration, which was required by the EU's structurally flawed Eurozone project. Brexit was really a matter of timing. It was never about nostalgia for a lost empire. It was always about sovereignty. There is a final irony. The UK will now observe from the sidelines the impact of an existential drama called populism by the elite, but in fact it runs much deeper. And it's been played out in terms of sovereignty and nationalism within the wider EU and in the European elections. The storyline of this drama features last year's tectonic shift in Germany's post-war political order. It features Italy's new government leading a pan-European Eurosceptic alliance in the forthcoming European elections. And its storyline includes the alienation of the Yellow Vest protesters on the streets of Paris, even as their government strives mightily for a integrationist federalist policy. That's hubris. So once again, how did all this come about? A toxic withdrawal agreement mismanaged by an inept government? Yes. A contrived backstop agreement facilitated by an Irish government fixated on the European elite and which impaled the UK government on a trap that they really should have seen. Yes. A clear determination on the part of the Europeans and the European elite, especially France, to deter any other country from the presumption of exiting and the actuality of serving a Franco-German empire with all of the imperialistic and militaristic trappings. Again, yes. But there's more to it. We are watching the consequences of a truly existential crisis in Europe. We're watching in real time the subjugation of national autonomy, culture, freedom, and identity by a centralized European quasi-empire, even in the richness of all that Europe stood for. This is the antithesis of what the European project was all about. It's the antithesis of the foundational and lived Christian values of its founders. That's where they were coming from. And of Christian democracy as the essential political platform for all that Europe achieved. Displaced by an aggressive and oppressive form of secularism. Take down Europe, take down Christian Europe, and the West will follow. Well, that's what's happening. The UK has been humbled. Ireland will be marginalised and dependent on the dominant powers who have their own agendas, as we will see only too clearly once the curtain falls on the final act of Brexit.